Well, hello everybody. I'm Ray Waters from the Village Church, and I am so excited that I have with me Josh Scott today, the pastor of the great Grace Point Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for being with us.
Ray, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Josh has just written his first book, and he has been on tour, and we said we need to get him in Atlanta, so he was going to be at Vinings Lake, a great church in West Atlanta this morning. And I said, we're going to just bring some village people to the house. And so we have a group of village people all around this room and in the room behind me or in front of me out there. And we're just going to talk to you about your book and basically just get to know you. And so thanks for giving us your time.
Thank you.
So tell me, just so they'll know kind of where you come from like a pretty conservative Baptist background?
Yeah, very conservative. So I grew up Free Will Baptist, and Free Will Baptist in Appalachia is different than Free Will Baptist everywhere. I mean, Free Will Baptist everywhere is pretty conservative. The version I grew up with was, you didn't know, my grandfather was the pastor,
right?
But that didn't mean he was going to preach every week. So we would show up to church, and there would be no music picked, no idea who was going to give the sermon. There was like a stable of preachers, right? And so they would get up, my pop would lead the service, that people would just call out hymns and we'd sing them. They'd pick somebody to do a special music. And then usually before the special music, he would say, so-and-so is going to preach. Maybe it's me, maybe it's brother so, not me, but him. Right. Maybe it's brother so-and-so. Sometimes it would be so-and-so is going to open and so-and-so is going to close. So you're going to get two sermons that day, which means lunch is getting farther against the horizon. And, you would see brother so-and-so pick up a really big Bible and just open it up and just start thumbing through looking for anything. what stands out. And so that was, theologically very conservative, King James only. And so after my pop died when I was around 14, I think my parents had the sense they were losing me a little bit. And so we made what was seen as a liberal move and became Southern Baptists.
Right.
So that gives you a gauge on where we fell in the conservative liberal spectrum. Going to Southern Baptist where you would believe that you couldn't lose your salvation. Because growing up Free Will, losing your salvation was as easily as losing your car keys. I actually was talking to I have a sleep doctor. I've never slept well. I'm doing way better than I used to. But I sat down with my sleep doctor and he was like, why do you think you've had trouble sleeping for 40 years or whatever? And I said, well, growing up, I was taught that Jesus would come back at any moment, or I could die at any moment, and that if I had any unrepented, unconfessed sin in my life, I would probably go to hell. And he looked at me and went, that'll do it.
Man. So did you feel like you were going to be a pastor when you were a young guy?
No, I was going to play shortstop for the Atlanta Braves.
Oh, cool.
When I was a young guy. That was my goal. So I actually didn't want to be a pastor because my grandfather was a pastor, and I saw how well the church loved him. And actually, it's this story, it's just unbelievable. My grandfather actually died at church during a business meeting. Right after somebody told him, you're the problem, you should go away. Now, I was 11 at the time. As, at my age now, I recognize a really horrible coincidence. But at 11, when people say, when did you start deconstructing your faith? And I was like, well, I was 11. And I didn't know it at the time. It was the seeds were planted. It all came back in my early 20s. But, that was for me, the idea of being a pastor. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that in my brain there was this connection with the church would kill you.
Right.
So no, and actually when I first started out, I knew I wanted to, like, we can talk about it if you want, but I knew that I wanted to give sermons, but I just didn't know how to do that. And I didn't want to be a pastor. Right.
Yeah. Man. So what was your path? You go to college, and when did things start clicking for you?
I gave my first sermon when I was 16,
right.
17. And the way it happened is we moved to the Southern Baptist Church, and somehow, and I was, I think personalities change over time. Like, I'm an Enneagram 7. I don't know if you're all into the Enneagram.
Some are.
But, I'm here for the party.
Right.
That's Enneagram 7. I was really, and still have a certain level of shyness to me. So, if I'm with people I know really well, I'll be the life of the party. But if I don't know you, I'm probably going to be a little more reserved at first. But in high school, I was just kind of reserved. But I was also a chronic people pleaser. And so the music minister came to me and said, we're having a youth service on X Sunday night. Pastor's out of town. You're one of the leaders in the youth group, which was news to me. Nobody told me until that moment. I didn't mean to be. And he said, would you give like a sermonette? I think is what he called it. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to do that. And then I can remember going home and laying on my bedroom floor and just praying to get the stomach virus.
Right.
Just because I was like, getting up in front of all those people sounds like torture.
Yeah.
And I got up and I gave this sermon. It was a Sunday night. It was 11 minutes long,
Right.
which probably seemed a lot longer for the people listening.
Right.
And it was on John 3:16. I totally don't stand by it now.
Right.
But at the time, when I got done, I just had this sense of like, I don't know what that was, but I've got to do that again. Like something clicked. There was something about it that I just had to. And so very quickly I got put on, like my pastor had me on this speaking. I'm from the largest county in Kentucky. Like I haven't even seen all of it. You can drive for hours. And I just would get put on the speaking circuit of churches without pastors or churches that have pastors that need to go on vacation. I've got some great stories.
Right.
I'm going to every nook and cranny,
Right.
and things just not going well. But I was 16, 17 when I started out.
So you go to college, you start pastoring in college? You
Did. So actually, I started pastoring when I was 19. My pastor left our home church, the First Baptist Church in Belfry, Kentucky, and they hired me as the interim. And I forget how long I did that.
know I started pastoring when I was 19 too.
Did you really?
19 years old. It's crazy.
Way too young.
Nobody
Way
should
too
have
young.
nobody said that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my life.
And at the time, I don't know if you had this, but at the time, people would always remark about, wow, you seem so young to be a pastor.
Yeah.
I was just so mad.
Now, see, I looked old. I looked 30, so nobody thought I was young.
Oh, I've had the opposite problem
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah.
Even now, people sometimes, and I definitely look older than 21 now, but sometimes people still look at me like, I don't know if you're old enough to be talking about this stuff.
Wow.
And so, yeah, but starting out like that and just going from place to place, and it was really trial by fire. And again, I mean, the only thing it took in the Southern Baptist, Southern Baptist world to be a pastor or to be a preacher was to be a male who said, I'm called to do this.
Yeah, that puts you in.
Now, they won't ordain you until they vet you thoroughly.
I was very
Very thoroughly, uncomfortably so. But prior to that, they'll turn you loose and let you go preach.
Right.
And so that's what I did, Most people were out having a good time, and I was preparing even then, theologically, by their standards, probably incorrect sermons because I didn't know anything.
Right.
I just started talking.
How did you go from that into this progressive thinking, diving deep into scripture, the way you wrote your book? How does that happen?
I found the slippery slope.
Yeah. The slippery
The
slope.
famous slippery slope.
Too.
So there was always a part of me. I mean, after that experience of being 11 and just having, if you think about that I was born into this world where there's sort of this sacred canopy that I lived under, where this is God does this for good people. God takes care of them, gives us parking spots at the Magic Mart. God takes care of us. Bad people don't get that. But then I see my pop, who, by all my knowledge, was a great human being who kind of has this thing where it doesn't go well for him. And so that started cracking that sacred canopy open. So even as 16, 17, 18, 19, I'm giving sermons, I'm interim pastoring my home church, and I'm saying things, and inside I'm going, gosh, I wish that wasn't true. Like still believing that it's true, but gosh, I wish it wasn't true. Like I wish it wasn't true that like if you don't believe the right things about God, you go to hell. I wish that wasn't true.
Right.
And so it was just that there was this little slight voice going on. And then my freshman year, it was the fall of 99, I think, my freshman year of college, I went to a public university and I sat down in a Hebrew Bible class. And they told me not to take religion courses at the university, but I knew that I was way strong and faithful and that I was going to correct the teacher. Was going to be my approach to this. And she came in, and first of all, she came in.
Oh my gosh, that's where it starts. Every time.
I'm a Southern Baptist kid, and
That's
she
the way
come
it
in and going to teach me the Bible.
Yeah.
And then she, we find out, is also a minister. And I was like, this is going to be harder than I thought. And thankfully, I was not such an idiot that I just immediately started talking, which has been rare in my life.
Right.
And she just started teaching, and I kept going back to class. And what was interesting is she would teach something, but it was hard to be mad about it or push back on it because it was there.
Right.
So when she's teaching me the documentary hypothesis, right? This is like, there are two stories of Noah's Ark, which I cover in the book. There are two stories of Noah's Ark. And I was like,
Yeah.
It's right there.
Never noticed that before.
Never saw it before. And there are 2 creation stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's right there, the first 2 chapters. They don't say the same thing. And so that's where, and it really for me was kind of drug-like. Like once she started,
Man.
it was like, I've got to have more of that. And so I took a New Testament course. And then, here's the kind of student I was as an undergraduate. I got everything but like one class of having a religion minor. And I was just like, I'm going to graduate. I just didn't get it.
Right.
Like, what are you thinking, man? You could have had a religion minor. But I just dove into every class they'd let me take on the Bible.
Right.
Yeah, I wasn't so much interested in a lot of other stuff, but classes on the Bible had me really hooked. And yeah, so it was then I graduated and could start reading whatever I want because I was an English major, so I was not reading the stuff they'd assigned me,
right,
but just kind of getting through.
Right.
And then I realized I could pick whatever I want, and I started reading stuff I would stumble on that was in this vein. And it also coincided with discovering, this would have been, I graduated college in 2003. In 2004, I had my first Rob Bell experience.
Okay.
And it was a Pneuma.
Right.
It was DVDs.
Right.
And it was one where he was getting into the history of the Bible. And I was like, okay, I knew you could do that at college. I didn't know you could do that at church.
In a spiritual setting, didn't know it. Yeah.
And so then I started listening to his sermons, and he would recommend books by Brian McLaren.
Yeah.
Another gateway drug for me. Marcus Board, John Dominic Crossan. And man, I was reading.
You got into it early. That's great.
Yeah. And so it was just one book after the other. And, by that time I was pastoring the church in Morgantown, but I was the interim there too. Like everybody wanted a trial with me before they decided to stick with it. And so we didn't have hardly any money. And so, like anytime I would get birthday, Christmas, anything, if we didn't have to repair something with it, I was going to the local bookstore and just buying whatever I could.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. So did you start? So, do you know that you're taking the church out of the vein it's been in? Do you know that?
Probably, yeah. Just because I know that, and it was one of those things that started out for me like reading Marcus Borg. I would be like, I love what he does with history. His theology I'm not so down with. Very quickly it was like, I think he's probably right.
Yeah.
About a lot more than he's wrong about. And so I just got to the point where, what they expected, even in Morgantown, the church when I went there, it was a non-denominational church. It was born out of another Southern Baptist church, but it was non-denominational technically. But it was kind of what most non-denominational churches are, which is they had contemporary music.
South Willow Creek kind of influence.
Kind of honestly fundamental theology in a lot of ways.
Very much.
And so I just knew that people were, especially around Easter and Christmas, they're expecting to hear certain things. And I couldn't give them certain things. So figuring out how I give them enough of what they need without saying something I can't say with integrity, it was, probably those years, 2005, 6, 7, 8, through maybe through 2014 or so, it was just like this.
Yeah.
And still losing people because I'm not saying the full thing.
Right.
I'm not coming out and saying, you're
going to go to hell.
You're going to go to hell. Repent. Jesus wants to cover you in blood.
Yeah.
All that stuff that I just could no longer say with any integrity. And so the church was changing and fluctuating, but there were also people who were finding us who were
progressive thinkers.
They were, and they were understanding the language.
That's all around here. They found us somehow. I don't know how.
Yeah. I'm so grateful.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. So did the LGBT inclusion for you, was that an easy thing? Did your church go with it pretty easily?
For me personally, I don't know. When people ask, when did you become affirming? I don't know the answer to the question.
I have a hard time with that too, because I've always been affirming as far back as I can remember.
So I remember that when my wife and I first got married, we had really some good friends who came out to us, a couple different people. And I just remember at the time being like, I know what the church has told me. I know what the Bible says, right? But all I know is there's a person sitting in front of me who I love, who I know that they love God, and that's evident in their lives. I felt like Peter in Acts 10 a little bit. Like, absolutely. Who can withhold baptism from them? They're clearly experiencing the Spirit, and so I just found myself saying to them, like, I want the same things for you that I want for me. We love you and we support you, and it's way different than saying it publicly.
Right. It took me a while to say it publicly.
Yeah, and so actually, I started talking about it more publicly around the time Grace Point did in 2015.
Right.
Here's how it happened for us. At one point in 2014, we had elders. That's how the church was governed. And I had called a meeting with our elders, and I just sit them down, and I said, this is going to be a long meeting. I'm going to tell you everything I think right now about every theological category, and then we have some decisions to make. So I started with inclusion and went down to atonement theory and just boom, 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 boom. And got to the end of the meeting, and I just said, look, I don't know if this is going to be the journey of MCC, so I'm the church, but I know it's my journey. And so if I need to resign so you can find somebody to take MCC where it needs to go, I'll do it. But I have to take this journey. And to their credit, to a person, they were all like, no, this is our journey as a church.
That's beautiful.
A year later, almost all of them were gone.
Right.
But they really wanted to take the journey. And so part of that was I was and still am and always will be a Brian McLaren fanboy.
Me too.
Just feel like I can't make words when he's like I'm talking to him. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like being in the presence. Somehow, because the thing about Brian is one of the most gracious, kind. Like the first time I ever talked to him, I was like, I'd like to buy you coffee. And he's like, here's my phone number. And I was like, who does that?
Right.
Coming out of the evangelical culture where it's like,
Big shots aren't going to give you.
you're going to stand in line.
Right.
And then they're going to disappear in a puff of smoke, like literally, because the lights and the fog were all happening, and they just vanish.
Right.
It's like a really cool trick. And so Brian's like, "Here's my phone number. Next time we're in the same place, text me or call me, and we'll have coffee." And he did it.
That's awesome.
And so I told kind of Brian, "Here's where we're at. Here's what we're wanting to do. We're going through one of your books. Is there any way we could get you to come to town?" And he said yes.
Man.
Now, when we announced it in March of 15. I was in West Virginia doing my grandmother's funeral, and service was not great there. And when I got back to the hotel and I turned on my phone, it had like messages everywhere. The same day we announced it was the same day everybody figured out where we stood, because having Brian come was for people in the community and the surrounding area was a very clear
lightning rod.
This is where they are on this. And so then I had to start answering the questions. And I just decided, you know what, I'm just not going to not answer the questions honestly at this point. And so we just started saying, yeah, this is where we are. And people really liked it in theory at first. We didn't lose a ton of people over that. What really was interesting is when I had a friend of mine who was a lesbian come and give the sermon. And that was when people realized, oh, this is what you mean by inclusion.
Yeah.
Like, we're not just saying we love people.
Yeah.
We're really saying that they're fully included and equal. And so there was some shifting around that, obviously. But, I kind of wish I'd have been able to do the thing where I sat down with everybody and went through all the passages and kind of ramped up to a statement.
Right.
But it was also sort of like, just rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
and people will be mad, and they'll go to the local hospital and they'll put flyers in the windows of cars about how dangerous this particular church is.
Did y'all have that?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had lots of things, that were similar to that, where people are warning people about us.
Man, I love the title of your book. I feel like you are talking to, I think so many are realizing that we have just looked at stories at a real surface level, and we've not gone deep and understood it maybe as grown up. What kind of motivated you? What made you think that would be a good way to go?
It finally dawned on me with all the stuff I've been learning. And then when I would interact with church folks about it, where they would seem like at first very hesitant, like when I give them there are 2 Noah's Ark stories in the Bible.
Right.
No. And it was almost like they were having to choose between using their faculties and being faithful.
Right.
And I eventually just realized that when it comes to our faith and spirituality, a lot of us, anybody grow up going to Sunday school where they flannel graphed stories for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what they would do is they would flannel graph out a story, and they would boil it down to here is the moral of the story. Right. So they tell you the story of Jonah, and then the moral of the story is, if you run from God's will, you will be eaten by a fish.
Right.
Now, that fish could be a bad grade on a test. When you're older, it could be a flat tire or a problem at work, right? God will jack with your life if you run from God, was sort of the message. But what I learned about the story of Jonah is actually the story of Jonah is this really important story that I think has one of the central messages of the Bible, which is if we don't learn to somehow love our enemies and exist with them, then we're all going to be swallowed up. There's no good outcome if we don't learn to do that. And so I just realized that we're in this, Sunday school environment where we're told this, and we're given a lens through which to see it all. The problem is we're also told that that's the only lens.
That's the only way.
And that to be faithful and accurate and orthodox, and it's maybe not explicitly told that, but at least implicitly told that, you have to hold that lens. And so people feel like they're having to choose between faithfulness and to the Bible and Scripture or this other kind of stuff, right? And what I realized is in every other area of our lives, what we learn at that age is always built on. And it's always meant to grow and to expand. For example, with our kids, my oldest is 13. I have no idea what I'm doing there. But our youngest are 7 and 6, right? And so they've been in first grade and kindergarten this year. And here's the cool thing that happens. You start kindergarten now, they bring home this thing called a letter ring. And it has on one side, there's a ring of papers, but on one side it has a capital A, one side a lowercase a, and they're all in order. And you flip through and you're just like, it's like a little bit like watching paint dry. What is this? A. What is this? B.
Right.
And then they really, at first you're like, what is this? D. No, that's an M, right? Right. But then they start to get good at it. And so you mix up the order. And then they start getting good at that. And then suddenly they're bringing home words. And after they bring home words, like when they start first grade, they're reading. The day I heard one of my daughters read a sentence out loud, I was like, huh, she learned to read. At least enough to read a sentence out loud.
Right.
And one of them can read and understand spelling enough to get the stuff my wife and I are spelling to each other. And then she tells her siblings, here's what they said. And all that is a basic skill was given.
Right.
And then stuff is added. We do it with math, right? 2 + 2, 4. And then very soon they put letters in there, which just seems awful to me. Like, why would you put letters and numbers together? But for people who are into that, like, it makes sense. Right. And it's all this progression over time. We didn't get any of that.
Right.
And so what I'm offering, and hopefully people are seeing in this book, is that actually there was all sorts of other stuff we should have been given, lenses that we could have developed over time, where we could have asked really important questions, where we could have expressed our curiosities, where we could have taken the Bible actually seriously. Because taking the Bible literally doesn't mean taking it seriously. And most of the literalists I know actually aren't taking the Bible seriously at all. Right. And so I just think there's a way to build those skills. And that's what I was doing when I started that religion class in college. I was taking what was sort of a base level skill set of these stories are in the Bible. The most important thing is that they happen and you do what they tell you. 2, these stories are really complex and complicated. And they are making claims far bigger than the ones we boiled them down to in Sunday school. And so in the book, I just try to say, like, what if we were actually to take the Bible seriously enough to pay attention to it?
Man, you killed it. I mean, you knocked it out. I listened to the sermons at Grace Point, and if y'all haven't heard him, he is one of the great preachers in the world. Y'all need to listen to him.
I'll pay you for that.
No, I'm serious. His teaching every week is incredible. I go out to the gym I've got in the backyard, and I listen to his sermons, and he's wonderful. And you do it in a way that's very honoring. It's not like you are throwing anything away. You've just built on it and helped us with lenses that let us see it like we're supposed to see it. So that's wonderful. I want to open it up for questions because I could just keep talking just to you, but I want y'all to, I know some of the people here have read your book 2 or 3 times. Some have read it just once. Some are buying it today. But y'all have heard enough of the story. Any questions that you might have? Tricia, can I put you on the spot first?
Yeah, I was curious as to what had led you to choose the specific passages that you chose.
Because the publisher said I couldn't do 12 to 15 stories, which is what I originally was like, let's do the whole Bible. And they're like, no, slow down. And so what I wanted to choose, a couple things. One, I wanted to choose mostly stories that would have been really familiar, that also maybe had been really oversimplified, that maybe were a little bit like, oh my gosh, that's in the Bible. Like the Binding of Isaac is a story for me that I'm always like, that's in the Bible? And then, there was honestly one, the Parable of the Talents was just an indulgence for me because that's one of my favorite stories.
I want you to talk about. I do want you to talk about that because this was mind blowing to me.
And once I shifted my understanding of that story, it shifted so much of how I saw Jesus teaching and what he was up to. And so it was really just trying to find, and it was kind of working with my editor, her name is Maria, and she's absolutely incredible. Just us kind of negotiating back and forth. What stories do we think would hit a broad audience? Because my publisher's a mainline publisher, and I come out of the evangelical space, and so I'm bringing an audience they don't really have.
Right.
They're bringing an audience I don't really have. And so figuring out how we could do something that would hit the most people. And I ended up being really happy with what we chose. I just wish we had done more.
Man, will you do a second? Will you do a sequel?
Not a sequel, but I start writing this week.
Very
On the
cool.
next project.
You know so you know what it is.
Yeah, it'll be similar in that it'll be trying to take texts that have been taken out of context, and as a result, and for some of them, real damage has been done, and trying to show like how we've misread them and recontextualize them.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Alejandro.
What was the part that you wanted to convey the most that at the same time was the most difficult for you, and why? Perhaps like that you knew what you wanted to say, but it was just you knew if you put it a certain way, people were not going to get it.
You know, I think my biggest concern, and the whole time I wrote the book, is that when people hear the word scholarship, often it's like, robot goes to sleep, right? Like, that just sounds boring. And so my concern was, I'm going to deal with scholarship in the book because there's no way to talk about these stories in a meaningful way that doesn't deal with scholarship. And so my concern was, how do I put anything so that it doesn't come off sounding boring, dry, or that what I'm inviting people to engage in is like somewhere on the top shelf that not just anybody can get up there and grab a hold of it. And what I actually say at the end of the book is I'm not trying to keep the 11 herbs and spices a secret on this thing. I'm just trying to show, like, even if you can't read Greek and Hebrew, even if you don't know a bunch of stuff about the literature outside of the Bible that speaks to the literature of the Bible, there are ways of paying attention to your questions and then following that up with research or asking questions. Knowing the questions to ask is really, in some ways, the first step of really getting into this stuff. So I wanted to make sure, my biggest challenge, I think, was trying to talk about biblical scholarship in a way that did not feel like I was talking about biblical scholarship, but in a way that felt like I was hopefully inviting people to see what's been right under their noses the whole time. They just were not given eyes to see it. And Richard Rohr has this great line where he says something to the effect of, and it's a paraphrase, but you can't see what you were taught not to look for.
Yeah.
That's a good line.
When you've been told I wish I came up with it.
Yes.
When you've been taught your whole life that don't look for this. It's almost like don't look at the man behind the curtain. But there's clearly somebody behind the curtain. Then it becomes really hard. And again, you feel like you're choosing between faithfulness to God, to the Bible, taking the Bible, loving the Bible, and then paying attention to what's actually going on in it. One of the questions somebody asked me today at Vinings was, what would you say to somebody who is saying, but the Bible was, it's God's book, God wrote it, it's the Word of God, it's God's, and you shouldn't do any of the stuff you're doing with it. Right. And I basically said, I would encourage them to do two things. One, actually read it.
Right.
Because the minute you actually read the Bible from cover to cover, and I don't mean just like the hits, I mean cover to cover, and you write down everything that stands out to you as being weird, curious, repetitive, whatever. And so do that, and then read about how we got the Bible.
Right.
And how translations happen. And then tell me again.
Yeah, that it's clear.
Ask that question again. Yeah. Because it becomes pretty evident that unless you just have these blinders on where you refuse, that there's stuff going on in there that at least needs to be talked about.
That's very good.
We talked about, at some point someone asked, is there going to be another book? You give these lenses in the book, and I haven't finished it yet, but would you say they're tools that people could take back to the Bible and other stories? Or are there other books you would recommend for folks that do want to continue diving deeper?
I mean, there are so many good books that, and I need to put together a list so people can just go to my website and download it, because right now, when you ask that, my brain just goes, blah, because there are so many. But that's the first part of the question again, because
Are the lenses tools people could use in the Bible?
So here's where I begin, because there are all sorts of things like texts like the Apocrypha, which we heard about, texts like these extra biblical texts that shed light on these texts, and discussions rabbis have had in documents that we didn't even know about that you can search online, and they're free and you can read what they said. But the most important thing you can do in the beginning, I think, is to just pay attention. As you're reading the Bible, what stands out to you? What is curious to you? And if my brain's a little tired, so if I've already said something about this today, please disregard it. And if I haven't said it already and you want to cut that part out, that's sweet. So I was preparing a sermon for last Sunday at Grace Point. And it was a sermon on Acts chapter 10 where Simon Peter has the vision where the sheet drops down. Gentile Pentecost. I saw a detail in there I'd never known before. Never noticed before. When Cornelius the centurion sends the people to find Simon Peter, he's at Joppa. And I'd never paid attention to Joppa before. He's at Joppa. Okay, he's the place. But I'd been so steeped in the story of Jonah, I thought, where? Joppa. Joppa is where, when Jonah is told to go preach to Nineveh, he runs to Joppa and boards a boat to somewhere else. And what we're being told in Acts chapter 10 is this is Simon Peter's Jonah experience. He's at Joppa. Will he sail toward Nineveh, his Nineveh, which is
that's really good.
A Roman centurion, like, the people who killed Jesus? Is he going to sail toward his enemy, or is he going to run away?
That's a good. I've never seen that.
Never noticed it before, and like literally have chills just thinking about it. The minute I saw it in the text, I just like, well, huh?
Yeah.
How interesting. And I just wrote down Joppa ? And so paying attention to the things. Another one for me, and everybody probably knew this. I'm embarrassed that I didn't catch this before. When Jesus is baptized, there's a bird, and it's a dove. And I was just thought, that's the Holy Spirit, right? Symbolized. Yeah, but what do doves symbolize? Peace. This is how he's going to do the work of messiahship. Through peace.
Brilliant.
Never noticed it before till literally I was recording a podcast episode talking about the baptism of Jesus. And I just kind of went, huh. I think that dove is more than just symbolic of spirit. I think it's symbolic of the way Jesus will seek to carry out his actions. He's going to be nonviolent. And the minute he goes away from that experience of baptism and being anointed with the nonviolent spirit, he goes into the desert and is tempted to act violently. I mean, those are the temptations, right? Do whatever you have to do to get what's yours. Bow down and worship me and you'll have all the king. Force God to act. Quickest way to do that is to kill a Roman, right? Like all of that stuff is just packed in the text. So I think being able to say, because I'm reading through a text, wow, never noticed that before. Here's something that doesn't add up. Wonder what's going on with that. And then, then you can begin to hunt down resources and you begin to sort out, credible resources versus incredible resources, right? I don't recommend just taking Wikipedia's word for it, but sometimes they do cite good resources. So I think it begins with something there. It's curious, caught my attention, and then beginning to make those notes, and then you can start doing the fun work of figuring out where those, figuring out type. And sometimes I literally just type in a search engine and see there's some weird stuff that pops up. But sometimes you find something from some writer who you've never heard of before, who has for some reason never gotten the ability to have their work blasted out, and they needed it to because it's absolutely brilliant. Right. That happens too.
Y'all, I think he nailed it. I think that was incredible, man. That was so good. Thank you. If you don't have the book, I hope you will get it, and I hope you'll read it, and I hope you will follow him. Tell us how we follow you.
So you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Josh_A_Scott. I have a Substack, which is joshscott.online, which is right. You can start. It's for free. You sign up. I send out usually it's something every week. This week it didn't happen because I'm busy.
Yeah, very good stuff though. You're getting his thoughts for the week, kind of biblical understanding of stuff. Very good.
And so there's that. And I actually have a new website that our friend Colby Martin just built for me. Cool. I just found out it was live. It's joshscott.co.
Right.
I think so that is a place where you can see what I'm up to, where I'm going to be speaking. Invite me to speak if it's your thing.
We want you to come. We want you to speak at the Village very much.
I like hanging out with you because you're like, you and Jane are the most encouraging people I know.
We're just
like on the planet. Does anybody else experience that? If they're around, I'm gonna like lean into them a little bit, just like a puppy, like scratch my head right. Please.
True. Anyway, thank you for watching. Get in touch with him. Come to the Village if you live in Atlanta. Go to Grace Point if you live in Nashville. We love you very much. Thank you for being with us.